I determined to give a week's strict attention to each of the virtues successfully. Thus, in the first week, my great guard was to avoid every. And if we look down, every is even, the least offense against temperance, leaving the other virtues to their ordinary chance, only marking every evening the faults of the day. Thus, in the first week, I could keep my first line marked T, clear of spots. I suppose the habit of that virtue so much strengthened and its opposite weakened, that I might venture extending my lines clear of spots, proceeding thus to the last. I could go through a course complete in 13 weeks and 4 courses in a year. And like them who have a garden to weed, does not attempt to eradicate all the bad herbs at once, which would exceed his reach and his strength, but works on his bed at a time, and having accomplished the first, proceeds to a second. So I should have hoped the encouraging pleasure of seeing on my pages the progress I made in virtue by clearing successfully my lines of their spots till the end by the number of courses. I should be happy in viewing a clean book after a 13 weeks daily examination. So he's talking about how he's going through and he's kind of trying to master, sort of the way that we master learning a skill, one a week. And he goes about it for 13 weeks. He compares this is a good sort of an extended metaphor here. He compares this to, when he messes up, he doesn't just give up. Just like a gardener who might find weeds or a dead plant, he doesn't give up on his whole garden. He just keeps on going. The precept of order requiring that every part of my business should have its allotted time, one page in my little book contained the following scheme of employment for the 24 hours of a natural day. And here he's just giving his schedule. He rises, washes, wash and address powerful goodness. And I'm not going to read all that. This is just an example of what his day might look like. I'm going to scroll back up to that real quick. We see at around 12:01, he reads and overlooks his. He works more, puts the things in their places, has supper, and goes on and on until he finally goes to sleep for the day around 10, between 10 and 11. I entered upon the execution of this plan for self-examination and continued it with occasional intermission for some time. I was surprised to find myself so much fuller of faults than I had imagined, but had the satisfaction of seeing them diminish, or they're gone. He's getting rid of them. To avoid the trouble of reviewing now then with my little book, which by scraping out of the marks of the paper of old faults to make room for new ones in a new course, become full of holes. I transferred my tables and preceipts to ivory leaves of a memorandum book, on which the lines were drawn with red ink and made a durable stain, and on those lines I marked my faults with black lead pencil. So, he says something here that I think we could all do. As he's going through all his faults, at first he thought, I'm a pretty good guy, right? And then he goes back and he looks at all his faults and he realizes, nah, I'm not that good. I think that that's something everyone can relate to. Like, we think we're pretty decent people, but when we go back and we look at our actions and we truly think about them, we see that we're maybe not as good as we thought we were. Which marks I could easily wipe out with a wet sponge. After a while, I went through one course only in a year, and afterward only one in several years, till at length I omitted them entirely, being employed in voyages and businesses abroad with multiplicity of affairs that interfered, but I always carried my little book with me. So he's saying here it took him a little bit longer than he thought. Like, he thought he was going to get through this in 13 weeks and he was going to be perfect, morally perfect. But he's, as he's going along, he's realizing it's not as easy. And why do you think that is? I mean, can we really truly be perfect morally? No. We're people. We make mistakes. That's what human beings do, and that's what he's learning. But he tried. And he says he kept his book with him. My scheme of order gave me the most trouble. I found that, though it might be practicable where a man's business was, such as to leave him the disposition of his time, that of a journeyman printer, for instance, it's not possible to be exactly observed by a master who must mix with the world and often receive people of a business at their own hours. Orders, too, with regard to places for things, papers, etc., I found extremely difficult to acquire. I had not been early accustomed to it, and having an exceedingly good memory, I was not so sensible to the inconvenience attending want of method. This article, therefore, cost me so much painful attention, and my faults in it vexed me so much. I made so little progress in amendment, and such frequent relapses that I was almost ready to give up the attempt and content myself with a faculty character in that respect, like the men who, in buying an axe of Smith by my neighbor, desired to have the whole of his surface as bright as the edge. So what he's talking about is, he's finding it hard to, do some of these, like the order is the virtue that he's having the most trouble with. He's having hard to maybe be refrain from being ugly to people, and be more patient. It's finding it more difficult as he goes by his work days, kind of like us, when we go to school and we might have every intention to be in a good mood that day, but somebody's going to cross us wrong, right? And it's hard, and that's what he says. He almost gave up. The smith consented to grind it bright for him if he would turn the wheel. It turned, while the smith pressed the broad face of the six hard and heavily in the stone, which made the turning of it very fatiguing. Tired. Fatigue means tired. It made him tired, very tired. The man came every now and then from the wheel to see how the work went on, and at length would take an axe as it was, without farther grinding. No, said the smith, turn on, we shall it bright by and by. As yet, it's only speckled. Yes, says the man, but I think we have a speckled axe at best, and I believe may have been the case with many who, having for want of some which means as I employed, found it the difficulty of obtaining good and breaking bad habits from their points of vice and virtue, having given up the struggle and concluded that a speckled axe was best for something. So he's talking about the different occupations that it might be hard for you to keep up this good attitude towards others. For something that pretended to be a reason was every now and then the suggesting to me that such extreme nicety was exacted of myself might be kind of foppery in morals, which, if it were known, would make me ridiculous, that a perfect character might be attended with the inconvenience of being envied and hated, and that benevolent man shall allow a few faults in himself to keep his friends in countenance. So he's beginning to realize that, a perfect man may cause a lot of other people to not like you, to hate you, or be jealous of you. So it's okay to have a couple of faults. He's realizing this as he studies other people and himself. In truth, I found myself incorrigible, which means impossible to correct, with respect to order. And now I'm grown old and my memory bad, I feel very sensibly the want of it. But on the whole, though I never arrived at the perfection I had been so ambitious of obtaining, but fell far short of it, yet I was by the endeavor a better and happier man than I otherwise should have been if I had not attempted it. As those who aim to perfect writing by imitating the engraved copies, though they never reach the wished for excellence of those copies, their hand is mended by the endeavor, and it is tolerable while it continues far and legible. So what he's saying here is, he learned and he never got to be perfect, but he thinks that he is a better man because of what he tried to do. It may be well my posterity should be informed that to this little artifice, with the blessing of God, their ancestor owed the constant facility of his life down to the 79th year in which this is written. So he's 79 years old when he's writing this, much later than he came up with these virtues. What reverse may attend the remainder is in the hand of Providence. But if they arrive, the reflection on past happiness enjoyed ought to help his bearing them with no more resignation to temperance. He ascribes his long continued health and what is still left to him of a good constitution to industry and fragility. The early easiness of his circumstances and acquisition of his fortune, with all knowledge that enabled him to be a useful citizen, has attained for him some degree of reputation among the learned. To sincerity and justice, the confidence of his country, and honorable employs it conferred upon him, and to the joint influence of the whole mass of the virtues, even in the imperfect state he was able to acquire them, all that evenness of temper and that cheerfulness in conversation which makes his company still sought for and agreeable even to his younger acquaintance. I hope, therefore, that some of my descendants may follow the example and reap the benefit.